A wealthy Beverly Hills veterinarian refused to save a bleeding German shepherd, tossing the dog and its muddy owner out into a violent storm. Only one exhausted assistant treated them like living beings. Among a staff desperate to impress their rich boss, only Harper risked her job to sneak them in through the back alley and stitch the dog's wounds. She had no idea she had just shown kindness to one of the most respected military commanders in the nation. Because no one inside that luxurious clinic knew the quiet man standing in the rain was actually Callum Hayes, a decorated Navy SEAL, and his dog was a battlefield hero. For a few minutes, Callum kept his head down. He listened to the doctor's casual insults. He watched polished smiles from people who loved talking about charity while treating a dying animal like garbage. And that arrogant doctor had no idea that this poor assistant was about to change her life forever and force him to confront a devastating truth. His elite empire was about to be destroyed by the very man he threw away. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from, and if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The rain fell hard over Beverly Hills, washing the luxury cars parked along the pristine sidewalks. Inside the Oasis Veterinary Center, however, the weather was completely irrelevant. The clinic was a fortress of marble, polished glass, and soft classical music. It did not smell like a typical veterinary office. It smelled like expensive lavender and ozone. Harper stood near the reception desk, her hands resting quietly on the cool stone counter. She was 24 years old, wearing faded green scrubs that had been washed far too many times. Her brown hair was pulled back into a simple, practical bun. She had a gentle face, tired eyes, and hands that knew exactly how to soothe a frightened animal. She lived an hour away in a neighborhood where people worried about paying rent, not about the exact shade of a poodle's organic diet. She needed this job. The student loans were a constant weight on her shoulders, and Oasis paid just enough to keep her from drowning. Dr. Arthur Sterling walked into the lobby. He was a man in his late 50s, his silver hair swept back perfectly, without a single strand out of place. His white coat was custom-tailored, bearing his name in neat gold embroidery. He did not look like a man who spent his days dealing with sick animals. He looked like a man who spent his days calculating profit margins and attending charity galas. "Mrs. Kensington," Dr. Sterling said, his voice dripping with practiced warmth. He approached a woman sitting on a velvet sofa. She was draped in designer silk, holding a tiny, shivering Pomeranian named Duke. Duke is looking absolutely magnificent today. That new imported vitamin regimen is doing wonders for his coat. Mrs. Kensington smiled, adjusting a heavy diamond bracelet on her wrist. "Oh, Arthur, you are a miracle worker. I was so worried when he refused to eat his truffles yesterday." "We cannot have that," Dr. Sterling chuckled smoothly. "I will have my staff prepare a special organic broth for him to take home. Only the absolute best for our Duke." Harper watched the exchange from the desk. She knew Duke was not sick. Duke was simply overfed and underexercised. But she said nothing. In places built on extreme wealth, competence is rarely rewarded as much as compliance. People like Harper were expected to be invisible machinery, keeping the glamorous illusion alive for those who could afford it. That was the unspoken rule of Oasis. You did not speak unless spoken to, and you always agreed with the client, no matter how ridiculous the request might be. Mrs. Kensington finally stood up, placing Duke carefully into a leather carrier that cost more than Harper made in 3 months. Dr. Sterling escorted her to the door himself, holding an umbrella to shield her from the light drizzle that had started outside. The moment the heavy glass door clicked shut behind the VIP client, the warmth completely vanished from Dr. Sterling's face. He turned around, his smile replaced by a hard, impatient scowl. He walked past the velvet sofa and stopped right in front of Harper's desk. "Harper," he said sharply, "look at the display shelves in the waiting area." Harper glanced over. The shelves held premium pet shampoos and imported treats. "They look fully stocked, Dr. Sterling." "I did not ask if they were stocked," he snapped. "I asked you to look at them. The labels on the bottom row are not facing precisely forward. It looks sloppy. We do not do sloppy at Oasis. Our clients expect perfection. Do you understand what perfection means, or is that concept too difficult for someone with your background to grasp?" The insult landed softly but carried a sharp sting. It was his subtle way of reminding her that she did not belong here. She was just a girl from the working class, lucky to even breathe the air in his clinic. "I will fix it right away, doctor," Harper said quietly. She kept her eyes lowered. Fighting back was a luxury she could not afford. "See that you do, and make sure the floors in examination room 2 are spotless. I want to leave in 30 minutes. Dr. Sterling turned on his heel and walked back into his private office, shutting the door firmly behind him. Harper let out a slow, shaky breath. Earlier that morning, she had spent an hour sitting on the floor with an anxious golden retriever, letting the dog rest its head on her lap while it recovered from anesthesia. Dr. Sterling had scolded her for sitting on the floor, claiming it looked unprofessional. But Harper knew the dog needed comfort, not professionalism. She understood the silent language of fear and pain that animals spoke. She walked over to the display shelves and began turning the bottles, aligning them with mindless precision. She thought about quitting. She thought about walking into his office, throwing her name tag on his expensive desk, and walking out into the night. But then she thought about the overdue electric bill. She swallowed her pride and finished the task. The hours dragged on. The clinic officially closed its doors to new appointments. The light drizzle outside shifted into a violent, howling rainstorm. Thunder rumbled over the wealthy neighborhood, shaking the large glass windows. The clinic was empty now, save for Harper and Dr. Sterling, who was packing up his briefcase. Harper was exhausted, her feet ached, and her back was stiff from bending over exam tables all day. She picked up a spray bottle and a cloth, moving to the front lobby to wipe down the glass doors one last time. The classical music had been turned off. The only sound was the heavy rain beating against the building. She looked out into the dark street. The street lights flickered against the downpour. It was the kind of night where no one in their right mind would be outside. Harper wiped the glass, watching her own tired reflection. She was ready to go home. She reached for the lock on the main door. Suddenly, a heavy hand slammed against the glass from the outside. Harper jumped back, her heart leaping into her throat. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw a large, dark figure standing in the storm. Before she could react, the heavy double doors were pushed open with tremendous force, letting the howling wind and cold rain rush into the immaculate, silent clinic. The heavy glass doors swung open. The wind howled, pushing a sheer sheet of rain across the pristine marble floor. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like he had brought the storm inside with him. He was tall, perhaps in his late 30s, with broad shoulders and a rugged, weathered face. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead by the rain. He wore a heavy tactical jacket and faded cargo pants, both of which were completely soaked and caked in dark, thick mud. This was Callum. He did not look like the typical clientele of Oasis. He did not possess the soft, pampered aura of Beverly Hills. Instead, he carried a dense, unbreakable stillness. In his arms, he carried a large German shepherd. The dog was older, its muzzle graying, and its fur was matted with rainwater and blood. A deep, jagged laceration ran along the dog's right hind leg, dripping dark crimson droplets onto the spotless white tiles. Harper gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She immediately recognized the severity of the wound. The bleeding was heavy, and if left untreated for much longer, the dog would go into hemorrhagic shock. Harper watched them closely, and a very specific observation settled into her mind. Usually, when pet owners rushed in with injured animals, there was a frantic, chaotic panic. They would scream, cry, and their pets would thrash and whine in sheer terror. But there was no panic here. The man held the heavy dog with a steady, unshakable grip, his breathing controlled and even. And the dog, despite what must have been agonizing pain, did not whimper. It did not thrash. It simply rested its large head against the man's chest, its dark eyes remarkably calm and alert. It was a silent, profound display of discipline and mutual trust that Harper had never witnessed in her years of veterinary work. They moved together as a single unit, bound by something much deeper than typical ownership. Callum stepped fully into the lobby, the automatic doors sliding shut behind him, cutting off the howl of the storm. He looked at Harper. His eyes were a piercing, stormy gray, holding a quiet intensity that made her stand up straighter. "I need a doctor," Callum said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and completely devoid of panic. "He is losing a lot of blood." Harper immediately snapped out of her shock. Her training took over. She knew she was not supposed to accept walk-ins after hours, especially not clients who looked like they could not afford the basic consultation fee, but she could not ignore a suffering animal. "Put him on the exam table in room 1, she instructed quickly, pointing down the hallway. "I will grab the emergency trauma kit." Callum nodded once. He moved with surprising grace for a man of his size, carrying the heavy dog down the hall. His boots left thick, muddy footprints mixed with blood across the gleaming floor. Harper rushed behind the reception desk, grabbing clean towels, pressure bandages, and the red emergency medical box. She was just about to sprint after Callum when the door to the private office clicked open. Dr. Arthur Sterling stepped out. He had already changed out of his white coat and was wearing a bespoke cashmere overcoat, holding a leather briefcase. He stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes darted from the muddy, bloody footprints on the marble floor to the wet trail leading down the pristine hallway. The scent of rain, mud, and copper filled the air, completely overpowering the clinic's signature lavender fragrance. Dr. Sterling's face twisted into an expression of absolute disgust. The warm, charming facade he used for Mrs. Kensington was entirely gone. "Harper," Dr. Sterling said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "What is the meaning of this?" "Dr. Sterling, an emergency just came in," Harper said quickly, clutching the medical kit against her chest. "A man and a severely injured German shepherd. The dog has a deep laceration on its hind leg. It is losing blood fast." Dr. Sterling did not look concerned. He looked furious. He walked slowly toward the hallway, his expensive Italian leather shoes stepping carefully to avoid the mud. He reached the open door of examination room 1 and looked inside. Callum was standing by the stainless steel table, keeping a steady hand on the dog's neck. The dog was lying on its side, breathing heavily but remaining perfectly still. Callum looked up as Dr. Sterling appeared in the doorway. "Are you the veterinarian?" Callum asked politely. Dr. Sterling looked Callum up and down. He took in the muddy tactical gear, the worn boots, and the complete lack of designer labels. Then he looked at the dog. He noticed the graying muzzle, the lack of a sparkly collar, and the blood pooling on his expensive, sterilized exam table. "I am the owner and chief of medicine at this facility," Dr. Sterling replied coldly. He did not step into the room. He stood in the doorway like a king inspecting a peasant who had wandered into his castle. "And this facility is closed." "My dog needs immediate stitches and antibiotics," Callum said, his voice remaining level. "I am willing to pay whatever it costs." "I highly doubt that, Doctor." Sterling scoffed, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He looked at Harper, who had just arrived beside him with the trauma kit. "Harper, look at this mess. Do you have any idea how much it will cost to sanitize this room? We are a premium care center, not a public pound for street vagrants and their wild mutts." Callum's jaw tightened. He did not raise his voice, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "He is not a mutt. He is my partner, and he needs medical attention right now." Harper felt a sickening knot form in her stomach. She looked at the dog, whose chest was rising and falling with labored breaths. The animal was being so brave, trusting the humans in the room to help it. To turn them away into the freezing storm was not just unprofessional, it was incredibly cruel. "Doctor, please," Harper whispered, stepping closer to her boss. "I can clean the room afterward. I will stay as late as you need me to. We cannot just let him bleed out." "Doctor?" Sterling turned his cold gaze onto her. "You do not dictate clinic policy, Harper. I do." The fluorescent lights of Examination Room 1 hummed with a sterile, cold intensity. They illuminated every drop of rain dripping from Callum's jacket and every dark smudge of mud on his boots. Most glaringly, the bright lights highlighted the growing pool of red on the stainless steel table beneath the German Shepherd. The contrast between the pristine Beverly Hills clinic and the raw, bleeding reality of the storm outside was jarring. Dr. Arthur Sterling stood near the doorway, keeping a safe distance so his expensive cashmere coat would not catch any stray droplets. He crossed his arms, looking down his nose at the scene with a mixture of annoyance and absolute disdain. "I do not think you fully grasp the situation," Dr. Sterling said, his tone dripping with condescension. "This is not a public charity. Oasis is an elite medical facility. Our clients pay a premium for exclusivity, cleanliness, and the absolute highest standard of care. We do not process walk-in emergencies from the street." Callum kept one hand firmly pressed against the makeshift bandage on his dog's leg. His large, calloused hand was steady, applying just enough pressure to slow the bleeding without causing unnecessary pain. The German Shepherd let out a low, rough exhale, but remained perfectly still, its dark eyes locked onto Callum's face. "I am not asking for charity," Callum replied. His voice was low, devoid of the panic or desperation that Dr. Sterling was used to hearing from frantic pet owners. It was a voice used to giving orders in chaotic situations. "I will pay your premium, but the surgery needs to happen right now." Dr. Sterling let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Will you now?" An after-hours emergency trauma surgery requiring anesthesia, suturing, and intensive care monitoring at this clinic will require a minimum upfront deposit of $15,000. We do not offer payment plans. We do not accept promises. Cash, or a verified black card only. Do you happen to have either of those in your muddy pockets? Callum did not flinch at the absurd number. He simply looked at the doctor with a gaze so piercing and cold that Dr. Sterling involuntarily took a half step back. But Callum did not reach for a wallet. He knew, and the doctor knew, that he did not have $15,000 on him. It is a strange reality of the world that those who possess true power rarely feel the need to display it, while those who possess only money must constantly remind everyone else of their status. Harper saw this contrast vividly in the tense, silent room. Dr. Sterling, wrapped in luxury, was loud, defensive, and cruel. The stranger, covered in grime and holding a dying animal, radiated a quiet, unshakable authority that needed no validation. He did not yell. He did not throw a tantrum. He simply absorbed the insult because his only priority was the life resting on the table. "Doctor, please," Harper interrupted, taking a brave step forward. Her voice trembled slightly, but she forced herself to meet Dr. Sterling's angry eyes. "The bleeding is arterial. If we do not clamp it and start a fluid line within the next 10 minutes, the dog will go into irreversible shock. We have the surgical tray already sterilized in the back. I can assist. It will not take long." Dr. Sterling turned his wrath onto her. "Are you deaf, Harper, or simply incompetent? I said no." "But we took an oath to help animals," Harper pleaded, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. "I took an oath to provide exceptional care to the animals whose owners respect my time and my business model," Dr. Sterling snapped. He gestured dismissively toward the German Shepherd. "Look at that thing. It is a street dog, an old one at that. Look at the scars on its snout and the state of its coat. It has lived its life. Take it to a county shelter if you want, though they will likely just put it down to save resources. I am not wasting my time, my sanitized equipment, or my expensive medicine on a dirty stray." Callum's jaw tightened so hard that the muscles in his cheek twitched. For a brief, terrifying second, Harper thought the large man was going to cross the room and throw the doctor through the glass wall. The restrained power in Callum's posture was palpable. But instead of lashing out, Callum simply lowered his head, pressing his forehead gently against the dog's ear. He whispered something soft, a single word of comfort that Harper could not catch. "Get them out," Dr. Sterling ordered Harper, his voice completely devoid of empathy. "Right now." You will escort this man and his mutt out the back door so they do not track more mud through my lobby. Then you will scrub this exam table until it shines. You will mop the floors, and you will lock up." Harper stood frozen, staring at the doctor in disbelief. "You cannot be serious. It is pouring rain out there. He will not make it to another clinic in time." "That is not my problem," Dr. Sterling said smoothly, adjusting the collar of his coat. He looked Harper dead in the eye. "If they are not out of this building in exactly 2 minutes, you can consider your employment here permanently terminated, and I will make a personal phone call to every veterinary board in California to ensure you never work in this industry again. Do I make myself perfectly clear?" Harper felt the blood drain from her face. Her job, her livelihood, her ability to pay off her mounting debts were all tied to this terrible man. Dr. Sterling did not wait for an answer. He turned on his expensive leather heels and walked out of the clinic, leaving the heavy silence of the room broken only by the sound of the rain lashing against the windows and the ragged, shallow breathing of the dying dog. The heavy glass door clicked shut, sealing Dr. Sterling out into the stormy night. The red taillights of his luxury sedan flared briefly through the rain-streaked windows before disappearing down the affluent street. Inside the clinic, the silence was suffocating. Harper stood rooted to the spot, her hands shaking. She had worked so hard for her veterinary technician license. She needed this job to survive, to pay off her mounting student loans, and to keep her small apartment. Callum did not say a word. He did not beg Harper to break the rules for him. He simply adjusted his grip on the bleeding German shepherd, his face a mask of quiet resignation. He turned toward the door, preparing to carry his dying partner back into the freezing downpour. Harper watched his broad back as he took a heavy step toward the exit. It is a profound tragedy of the modern world that compassion is often treated as a liability, while cruelty is rewarded as good business. Harper knew exactly what good business looked like at Oasis, but she also knew what she could not live with. She could not let this brave animal die just to protect the fragile ego of a rich man. "Wait," Harper said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it echoed loudly in the empty lobby. Callum stopped, turning his head slightly. "Do not go out the front," Harper said, her heart hammering against her ribs. She moved quickly now, all hesitation vanishing from her posture. "There is an alleyway behind the building. Drive your truck to the rear delivery door. I will meet you there in exactly 2 minutes. Go." Callum nodded once. He did not waste time with unnecessary questions. He pushed through the front doors and carried the heavy dog out into the rain. Harper sprinted to the reception desk, grabbed her personal medical kit from her locker, and ran down the hallway. She bypassed the pristine, expensive surgical suites that Dr. Sterling closely monitored with security cameras. Instead, she opened the door to a small, windowless utility and storage room. It had a stainless steel sink and a sturdy prep table used for unpacking inventory, a place Dr. Sterling never bothered to check. A moment later, a quiet knock sounded at the heavy metal back door. Harper threw the deadbolt and pulled it open. The wind whipped her hair across her face. Callum stood in the dark alley, shielding the dog with his own body. "In here?" Harper urged, stepping back. Callum carried the dog inside and gently laid him on the supply table. Under the harsh fluorescent bulb of the storage room, the injury looked even worse. The laceration on the hind leg was deep, exposing muscle and tearing through a minor artery. Harper did not have access to the clinic's premium anesthesia machine. She only had local numbing agents, a staple kit, surgical sutures, and her own steady hands. "I cannot put him fully under," Harper explained, her voice entirely professional now. The fear of losing her job was gone, replaced by the pure instinct to heal. "I can numb the area, but the pressure will still hurt. You need to hold him completely still." "He will not move," Callum said with absolute certainty. He placed one hand on the dog's chest and leaned his face close to the animal's ear. He spoke softly, a quiet murmur of reassurance. Harper quickly cleaned the wound with antiseptic. As she worked, she noticed something extraordinary. The German Shepherd's body was a map of old violence. There were thick raised scars across his ribs, a jagged mark near his shoulder, and a small circular burn mark that looked terrifyingly like a bullet graze. These were not the injuries of a neglected street dog getting into territorial fights. These were the scars of a highly trained soldier. Harper administered the local anesthetic. When she began to clamp the bleeding vessel and stitch the torn muscle, the pain must have been agonizing. Yet the dog only let out a low, vibrating hum in his throat. He did not snap. He did not panic. He kept his eyes locked firmly on Callum. True loyalty, Harper realized in that quiet room, does not require a diamond-studded collar or a pristine pedigree. It is forged in the fires of shared survival, a silent pact between two souls who have walked through hell together. It took Harper 40 minutes to close the wound. She worked with meticulous care, ensuring every stitch was perfectly placed to prevent infection. She then wrapped the leg in a thick, sterile pressure bandage and administered a strong dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics from her own emergency stash. When she finally tied off the bandage and stepped back, she let out a long, shaky exhale. Her scrubs were stained with blood, and her hands were cramping. "He is stable," Harper said softly, wiping her forehead with the back of her arm. "The bleeding has stopped. He needs rest, and you must keep the wound clean, but he is going to make it." The heavy tension in Callum's shoulders finally dropped. He let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for hours. He gently stroked the dog's head, and the German Shepherd closed his eyes, leaning into the rough touch. Callum turned to look at Harper. His stormy gray eyes were no longer cold. They were filled with a profound, overwhelming gratitude. He reached into his tactical jacket and pulled out a small, waterproof notebook. "Write down your name and your phone number," Callum said. His voice was thick with emotion, though his face remained perfectly stoic. "You do not have to pay me," Harper said quickly, shaking her head. "Just take care of him." "Write it," Callum insisted gently, sliding the notebook and a pen across the metal table. "You risked your livelihood tonight. You saved my partner when the rest of this city would not even look at him. I am a man who honors his debts. I will repay this one, Harper." Harper hesitated, then wrote her name and number on the damp paper. Callum carefully tore the page out and tucked it securely into his chest pocket. He carefully lifted the sleeping German Shepherd into his arms once more. He paused at the back door, looking back at the young woman standing in the small blood-stained storage room. "Thank you," Callum said simply. The two words carried the weight of a solemn oath. He stepped out into the rainy alleyway, disappearing into the dark, leaving Harper alone to clean up the mess before the morning sun came up. The next 4 days at the Oasis Veterinary Center did not revolve around medicine or the healing of animals. Instead, the clinic was completely transformed into a stage. The annual Oasis Foundation Gala was the cornerstone of Dr. Arthur Sterling's social calendar. It was a massive fundraising event designed ostensibly to support animal welfare, but in reality it served as a glittering advertisement for his elite practice and a monument to his own ego. It is a strange phenomenon that in circles of extreme wealth, charity is rarely a private act of grace. It is a highly publicized performance, a competitive sport where the size of the donation matters less than the number of photographers present to capture the moment. People did not buy $10,000 tables at the Oasis Gala because they cared deeply about stray dogs. They bought them to secure their social standing, to rub elbows with politicians, and to be seen as benevolent members of the Beverly Hills elite. White tents were erected in the private parking lot. Delivery trucks arrived hourly, unloading crystal chandeliers, velvet draping, and thousands of imported white orchids. The clinic's signature lavender scent was entirely overpowered by the heavy aroma of expensive floral arrangements and the rich smell of catered truffles. Dr. Sterling was in his element. He abandoned his medical duties entirely, leaving the routine checkups to the junior staff. He stalked through the hallways in custom-tailored suits, trailed constantly by Elise, a frantic event coordinator who carried a thick clipboard and looked permanently terrified of making a mistake. "Elise, the lighting in the main lobby is far too harsh," Dr. Sterling snapped, pointing toward the ceiling. "I want a soft amber glow. The mayor is attending tonight, and I will not have him photographed under fluorescent bulbs. And ensure the champagne tower is moved 3 feet to the left. It needs to be the centerpiece when the press walks in." "Right away, Doctor," Elise stammered, scribbling furiously on her clipboard. Harper watched this chaos from the periphery. As punishment for her perceived insubordination earlier in the week, Dr. Sterling had strictly forbidden her from interacting with any clients or participating in the gala preparations. She was relegated entirely to the back wards. Her assigned duties were to clean the kennels, sanitize the surgical trays, and manage the heavy bags of trash in the back alley. She was instructed to remain completely out of sight once the wealthy guests began to arrive. But surprisingly, Harper did not feel humiliated. In fact, she preferred the quiet isolation of the storage rooms and the kennels. The physical labor was exhausting, but it kept her far away from Dr. Sterling's toxic vanity. More importantly, she had a secret source of joy that made the grueling hours completely bearable. Every evening, just as her shift was ending, her cheap, cracked smartphone would buzz in her pocket. It was always a text message from an unknown number. The messages were remarkably brief, written with the blunt, precise efficiency of a military report. Yet they carried a profound warmth. "Stitches are holding well. He ate a full bowl of food today. Thank you." Harper had immediately saved the number under the name Callum. She would smile, standing alone in the sterile prep room, and type back a quick reminder to keep the bandage dry. The next day, another brief update would arrive. "Swelling is down. He is trying to walk on it. I am making him rest." These short, simple texts became Harper's anchor. They were the undeniable proof that her reckless decision had mattered. While Dr. Sterling obsessed over the color of the napkins and the arrangement of the caviar, Harper knew that a brave, loyal animal was breathing easily somewhere out in the city because she had chosen to do the right thing. That quiet knowledge was worth more to her than any praise her boss could ever offer. The night of the gala finally arrived. By 8 o'clock, the transformation was complete. The Oasis Veterinary Center was unrecognizable. A string quartet played elegant classical music in the corner of the lobby. Valets in crisp red vests scrambled to park a seemingly endless line of Ferraris, Bentleys, and armored luxury SUVs. The guests poured in, bringing with them the dazzling sparkle of diamonds and the rustle of designer silk gowns. Waiters circulated through the crowd with silver trays, offering glasses of vintage champagne and delicate pastries topped with edible gold leaf. The air buzzed with polite laughter, calculated networking, and the continuous flashing of camera lenses. Dr. Sterling stood at the center of it all, wearing a sharp black tuxedo. He greeted the local politicians, the famous actors, and the tech billionaires with an excessively charming smile. He shook hands, kissed cheeks, and spoke loudly about his lifelong, unwavering dedication to the voiceless creatures of the world. The hypocrisy of his words hung in the air, invisible to the cheering crowd, but painfully obvious to anyone who truly knew him. Harper stood in the deep shadows near the swinging doors of the kitchen and storage area. She was dressed in her faded green scrubs, holding a heavy black trash bag that she was about to take out to the alley. She peeked through the small glass window of the door, observing the glittering, glamorous world that she was explicitly banned from entering. She watched a famous actress laugh at one of Dr. Sterling's jokes. She watched a wealthy investor write a massive check for the foundation, knowing full well that a large portion of those funds would likely go toward clinic renovations rather than actual animal rescue. She felt completely detached from the people in that room. They existed in a parallel universe, shielded by money from the harsh realities of the world. Harper let out a soft sigh, adjusted her grip on the trash bag, and prepared to push through the back door into the dark alley. She did not need their champagne, and she did not need their approval. She was content in her invisible corner. But as the string quartet finished their set and Dr. Sterling walked up to the microphone on the grand stage to deliver his welcoming speech, Harper had absolutely no idea that the carefully constructed illusion of the Oasis Gala was about to be shattered completely. Dr. Arthur Sterling stood at the podium, bathed in the soft amber glow of a perfectly positioned spotlight. He adjusted the microphone with a practiced, elegant hand, looking out over a sea of glittering diamonds and tailored tuxedos. The Oasis Foundation Gala was a spectacular success. The room was packed with the most influential figures in Beverly Hills, from tech billionaires to prominent politicians. Every single person in the room held a glass of expensive champagne, their faces fixed in expressions of polite admiration. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Sterling began, his voice echoing smoothly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "We are gathered here tonight not just as lovers of animals, but as guardians of the vulnerable. At Oasis, we believe that every single life matters. We dedicate our days and often our sleepless nights to ensuring that no creature is left behind. We provide a sanctuary of healing, a beacon of hope for those who cannot speak for themselves." The crowd erupted into warm, enthusiastic applause. The mayor, sitting at the VIP table right in front of the stage, nodded approvingly and raised his glass. Watching from the shadows of the kitchen doors, Harper felt a deep twist of nausea in her stomach. It is a peculiar trait of the highly privileged that they can purchase absolution for a few $1,000s, mistaking a tax-deductible donation for genuine moral courage. The people in this room truly believed they were heroes simply because they had written a check. They had no idea that the man standing on the stage, preaching about compassion and sleepless nights, had recently ordered a dying animal to be thrown out into a freezing rainstorm simply because it might stain his floors. Harper leaned against the cool metal frame of the door, holding her heavy trash bag. She wanted nothing more than to take the garbage out, clock out of her shift, and go back to her tiny apartment. The hypocrisy of the gala was suffocating. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, finding comfort only in the memory of the brief, direct text messages she had received from Callum over the past few days. The German Shepherd was alive. That was the only truth that mattered tonight. As Dr. Sterling continued his grand speech, boasting about his clinic's unparalleled survival rates, a strange vibration began to ripple through the floorboards. At first it was subtle. The champagne in the crystal glasses resting on the tables began to tremble ever so slightly. Then the sound reached the lobby. It was a low, guttural roar of heavy diesel engines, completely unlike the refined, quiet purr of the luxury sports cars parked outside. The noise grew louder, heavier, and far more imposing, drowning out the gentle melodies of the string quartet in the corner. Heads began to turn toward the massive glass entrance of the clinic. The valets in their crisp red vests were seen through the windows, scrambling backward in absolute panic. 4 massive matte black military SUVs, heavily armored and bearing official government plates, pulled aggressively into the private valet circle. They did not park neatly. They angled themselves with tactical precision, blocking the entrance entirely and completely dwarfing the sleek Ferraris and Bentleys around them. Red and blue strobe lights flashed from the dashboards of the vehicles, cutting through the elegant amber lighting of the gala. The string quartet faltered, the cellist missing a note before the group stopped playing altogether. A heavy, confused silence fell over the glittering crowd. Dr. Sterling stopped mid-sentence, his charming smile faltering into a mask of pure bewilderment. He tapped the microphone, annoyed by the interruption. "It appears we have some unexpected traffic outside," Dr. Sterling said, trying to force a light-hearted chuckle to ease the rising tension in the room. Perhaps someone brought a rather large donation. Nobody laughed. The atmosphere in the room had shifted violently. The wealthy elite were accustomed to controlling their environments completely. The sudden, uninvited presence of military vehicles in their private sanctuary felt distinctly threatening. The heavy doors of the lead SUV swung open. Several men in crisp, dark uniforms stepped out, moving with sharp, disciplined efficiency. They took up positions near the entrance, their faces entirely unreadable. Then, the rear door of the second vehicle opened. A man stepped out and walked purposefully toward the glass doors of the clinic. As he pushed through the entrance, the security guards hired for the gala immediately stepped back, instinctively making way. The man was an admiral of the United States Navy. He wore his immaculate white dress uniform, his chest heavy with rows of colorful ribbons, commendations, and medals of valor. His silver hair was cropped short, and his posture radiated an absolute, unshakable authority that no amount of money in the room could ever buy. He walked slowly down the center aisle, his polished black shoes echoing sharply against the marble floor. The sea of wealthy guests parted for him in stunned silence. They pulled their silk gowns aside and held their breaths. The power this man carried was not the soft, negotiable power of corporate boardrooms. It was the hard, unyielding reality of the outside world crashing into their fragile bubble. Dr. Sterling stood frozen behind the podium, his hands gripping the edges of the wooden stand. His face had gone incredibly pale. For all his arrogance, he knew better than to demand an explanation from a high-ranking military official. The admiral stopped precisely 10 feet away from the stage. He did not look impressed by the crystal chandeliers or the thousands of imported orchids. He surveyed the room with sharp, calculating eyes, assessing the crowd as if inspecting a lineup of entirely unimpressive recruits. Finally, the admiral clasped his hands behind his back and spoke. He did not need a microphone. His voice boomed through the silent lobby, carrying the weight of decades of command. "Pardon the interruption to your evening festivities," the admiral announced, his tone polite, but entirely devoid of warmth. "I am Admiral Thomas Vance of the United States Navy. I am not here for your champagne, and I am certainly not here to listen to speeches. I am here because this facility was the site of a profound act of service, and I intend to honor a very specific guest in this room tonight." Whispers broke out among the billionaires and actors. People began looking around, wondering which wealthy philanthropist among them was secretly connected to the top tiers of the military. "Doctor," Sterling immediately puffed up his chest, a new greedy spark igniting in his eyes. He assumed the military had come to recognize his clinic for some unknown reason. In the back of the room, still holding the plastic trash bag, Harper felt her heart completely stop. She peered through the glass window of the kitchen door, her breath catching in her throat, because she suddenly knew exactly who they were looking for. The grand lobby of the Oasis Veterinary Center was so quiet that one could hear the rain tapping lightly against the high glass windows. The string quartet had completely frozen, their bows hovering inches above their instruments. The wealthy elite of Beverly Hills stood entirely motionless, their champagne glasses held rigidly in their hands. They were all staring at Admiral Thomas Vance, a man who possessed a kind of raw, undeniable gravity that made their wealth feel incredibly small. The admiral did not smile. He turned his head slowly, looking back toward the glass entrance. "Commander," the admiral called out, his voice sharp and clear. "Bring him in." From the dark, rainy night outside, a figure stepped through the sliding automatic doors. Gasps rippled through the crowd. It was Callum, but he was no longer the muddy, disheveled stranger who had begged for help days earlier. He was dressed in his full, immaculate United States Navy dress uniform. The crisp fabric was dark and perfectly pressed. Gold stripes lined his sleeves, and a heavy cluster of medals rested over his heart, crowned by the unmistakable gold trident of a Navy SEAL. His posture was perfectly straight, radiating a quiet, dangerous discipline. Walking right beside him, keeping perfect pace despite a noticeable limp, was the old German shepherd. The dog looked remarkably different now. His coat had been gently cleaned, and while his muzzle was gray and scarred, he carried himself with immense pride. A thick, clean bandage wrapped securely around his right hind leg. He did not cower at the large crowd or the bright flashing lights of the cameras. He sat dutifully at Callum's side, his dark eyes scanning the room with the alertness of a seasoned soldier. Behind the podium, Dr. Arthur Sterling gripped the wooden edges so tightly his knuckles turned entirely white. The color drained from his face, replaced by a sickly, pale sheen of sweat. He recognized the man. He recognized the dog. The pieces clicked together in his mind, and a cold dread settled heavily in his stomach. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Vance announced, gesturing toward the pair. "Allow me to introduce Commander Callum Hayes, an active duty team leader in the Navy SEALs. And beside him is his partner, Titan. Titan is a military working dog, an elite K-9 specialist in explosive ordnance disposal. During their last deployment in the Middle East, Titan detected a buried improvised explosive device that had bypassed all our mechanical sensors. In doing so, he saved the lives of Commander Hayes and 14 other American soldiers." The crowd broke into a spontaneous, thunderous applause. The mayor stood up, clapping loudly. The cameras flashed aggressively, capturing the images of the handsome military officer and the heroic dog. It is a fascinating reality that liars fear nothing more than a quiet man armed with the simple truth. Dr. Sterling had built his entire empire on loud, expensive illusions, but as the applause washed over the room, he realized his illusion was cracking. However, his arrogance blinded him to the danger. His survival instinct kicked in, and he immediately decided to hijack the moment. Dr. Sterling forced a brilliant, wide smile onto his face. He stepped out from behind the podium, clapping his hands together as he walked toward Callum. "What an absolute honor," Dr. Sterling projected loudly, ensuring the microphones caught his voice. "We are incredibly humbled by your presence, Commander Hayes. When this brave hero came to our clinic in his hour of need, we knew we had to do everything in our power to save him. Oasis prides itself on delivering world-class care, and seeing Titan walking tonight is the greatest reward my staff and I could ever ask for. Please, let us shake hands." Dr. Sterling extended a manicured hand toward Callum, his eyes pleading silently for the soldier to play along. Callum looked down at the extended hand. He did not move. He did not smile. He simply stared at Dr. Sterling with the same stormy, cold gray eyes he had shown on that rainy night. "I am not going to shake your hand, Doctor," Callum said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a deadly calm that cut through the fading applause like a knife. The smile on Dr. Sterling's face froze. The room went completely silent once again. Callum stepped past the doctor and walked directly up to the podium. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the sea of wealthy donors, politicians, and journalists. "4 nights ago, I brought my partner to this clinic," Callum began, his voice echoing through the grand hall. He was bleeding out from a severe laceration. "I did not care about the cost, and I only asked for a doctor to save his life." Callum turned his head slightly, locking eyes with the trembling Dr. Sterling. "The man you see standing before you, the man who just spoke so eloquently about compassion and sleepless nights, refused to treat my dog," Callum stated plainly. "He told me that this facility was an elite medical center, not a public charity. He demanded a $15,000 cash deposit up front before he would even look at the wound. And when I could not produce that money on the spot, he called Titan a dirty street mutt. He ordered his staff to throw us back out into the freezing rain to die, simply because our presence might stain his expensive marble floors." A collective gasp swept through the room. The mayor lowered his glass, his expression turning to one of absolute disgust. The cameras, which had been taking pictures of the heroes, suddenly pivoted and aimed their lenses directly at Dr. Sterling. "That is a lie," Dr. Sterling sputtered, his voice cracking in panic. He looked around wildly at his wealthy clients. "He is confused. It was a misunderstanding of clinic policy." "I do not get confused, Doctor," Callum replied firmly. "And there is no policy that excuses cowardice and cruelty. You did not save Titan. You abandoned him. You are a man who wears a white coat to count money, not to heal the injured. Your charity is nothing but a performance." The room erupted into shocked murmurs. The glamorous facade of the Oasis Gala was completely destroyed, replaced by the ugly, undeniable reality of the man who ran it. Investors began whispering furiously to one another. Dr. Sterling backed away, looking like a trapped animal, realizing his career was dissolving before his very eyes. But Callum was not finished. He turned away from the disgraced doctor and looked past the glittering crowd, his eyes searching the shadows near the kitchen doors. "However," Callum said, his voice softening slightly, "Titan is alive today, but not because of this clinic's leadership. He is alive because someone in this building possessed the courage that this doctor entirely lacks." Callum kept his eyes fixed on the dim area near the swinging kitchen doors. The entire room followed his gaze. The wealthy guests, the journalists, and the military personnel all turned to look at the dark corner. Harper stood frozen, still clutching the heavy black plastic trash bag. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had spent her entire life trying to remain invisible in rooms like this. Now, hundreds of eyes were locked onto her faded green scrubs. "Miss Harper," Callum said, his voice echoing clearly through the silent room. "Please come forward." For a moment she could not move. Then Titan let out a sharp, joyful bark. The old German shepherd recognized her immediately. His tail wagged, thumping happily against the polished stage. That familiar sound broke her paralysis. She set the trash bag down against the wall and slowly stepped out of the shadows. It is a profound irony that in a room filled with billions of dollars, the only person who could afford to pay the price of true compassion was the one who earned the least. Harper walked down the center aisle, her worn sneakers completely silent on the marble floor. She felt entirely out of place among the silk gowns and tailored tuxedos, yet she held her head high. She had done nothing wrong. Callum stepped down from the podium and met her halfway. He did not treat her like a subordinate or a simple employee. He looked at her with the utmost respect, the kind of respect usually reserved for fellow soldiers. "This young woman," Callum announced to the crowd standing beside Harper, "risked her entire livelihood to save my partner. When this clinic locked its doors on us, she snuck us through the back alley. She operated on Titan in a storage room using her own personal medical supplies. She asked for no money and expected no recognition. She simply saw a life in pain and chose to heal it." The silence in the room transformed into a heavy, suffocating wave of anger directed entirely at Dr. Arthur Sterling. The wealthy elite tolerate many things, but they absolutely despise being made to look foolish. They had just written massive checks to a man who possessed no moral compass, a man who had nearly let a decorated military hero die on the street. The mayor of Beverly Hills stood up abruptly. He picked up his champagne glass and slammed it down onto the table with a loud crack. "Arthur," the mayor said, his voice dripping with disgust, "you are an absolute disgrace to this city. Do not ever contact my office again." The famous actress who had been laughing at Dr. Sterling's jokes just 20 minutes earlier turned her back to him. Several prominent investors pulled out their phones, immediately instructing their assistants to cancel the checks they had written for the Oasis Foundation. Dr. Sterling stood behind the podium, completely ruined. His face was pale, his hands shaking violently as he watched his empire crumble in a matter of seconds. The cameras flashed endlessly, capturing the absolute panic of a man whose hollow facade had finally collapsed. Admiral Vance stepped forward, approaching Harper with a warm, genuine smile. He looked down at her faded scrubs and nodded approvingly. "Miss Harper," the Admiral said gently, "the United States Navy owes you a profound debt of gratitude. You demonstrated exceptional character under pressure. It seems to me that your talents are being severely wasted in a place like this." Before Harper could find the words to respond, an older billionaire sitting in the front row stood up. He was one of the largest real estate developers in California. "Excuse me, Admiral," the billionaire called out. He pointed a finger at Dr. Sterling. "I just canceled a very large donation to this fraud, but I still want to give that money to the animals. Miss Harper, if you ever want to open your own clinic, a real clinic that actually helps animals in need, you let me know. I will fund the entire building." Another voice rang out from the crowd. "I will match his donation." Suddenly, the room erupted. The wealthy guests, eager to distance themselves from Dr. Sterling and align themselves with the true hero of the night, began pledging their support directly to Harper. She stood there, in absolute shock, tears welling up in her eyes. In less than 5 minutes, she had gone from an overworked, invisible employee to the founder of a completely funded animal rescue center. Dr. Sterling tried to speak, to beg for forgiveness, but his voice was entirely drowned out by the crowd. The security guards he had hired for the gala slowly stepped aside, refusing to protect him from the angry stares of his former clients. Callum placed a reassuring hand on Harper's shoulder. She looked up at him, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I told you I honor my debts," Callum said quietly, a rare, soft smile breaking through his stoic expression. Titan limped over and pressed his heavy head against Harper's side. She knelt down on the pristine marble floor, not caring at all about looking professional, and wrapped her arms around the brave dog's neck. Titan let out a contented sigh. The flashing lights of the cameras and the loud voices of the wealthy elite faded into the background. In the center of the chaotic, glittering room, Harper looked up at the tall military officer and the heroic German shepherd. They had walked into her life during a violent storm, but they had left behind a brilliant, beautiful new dawn. Justice had not only been served, it had completely rewritten her destiny. The story of Harper, Callum, and Titan teaches us a powerful lesson. True worth is never measured by the size of a bank account, the price of a suit, or the prestige of a title. It is measured by the depth of our compassion when faced with the suffering of others. Dr. Sterling had every material advantage in the world, yet he was entirely impoverished in character. Harper, despite her financial struggles and faded scrubs, possessed a richness of heart that ultimately saved a hero's life and completely changed her own destiny. In my view, this story serves as a beautiful reminder that the universe has a remarkable way of balancing the scales. The quiet acts of kindness you perform in the dark will always find their way into the light. No good deed is ever truly wasted, and those who act with pure intentions will eventually receive the grace they deserve. May God bless you and your loved ones with the strength and courage to always choose compassion, even when it is the hardest choice to make. If this story touched your heart, please type Amen in the comments below to share the blessing. Do not forget to share this video with your friends, leave a comment letting us know your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories.